The blood-red sun hung low over the dusty horizon as Madeline Foster stumbled forward, her once fine traveling dress now torn and soiled, her throat parched beyond bearing. 3 days without water had left her delirious, wandering aimlessly across the unforgiving Arizona territory after the stagecoach robbery that had left her the sole survivor. The year was 1876, and Madeline had never imagined her journey west would end like this. Having left Boston to take a teaching position in Tucson, she now found herself lost in a landscape both beautiful and deadly. Her vision blurred as the distant mountains seemed to shimmer and dance in the heat. The last of her strength abandoned her, and she felt her knees buckle beneath the weight of exhaustion and thirst. As consciousness slipped away, she thought she heard the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats approaching, but dismissed it as another hallucination sent to torment her in these final moments. The world tilted sideways as she collapsed onto the sun-baked earth, the azure western sky the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her. Xavier McKenzie pulled back on his horse's reins, his keen eyes having spotted something unusual on the horizon, something that didn't belong in this desolate stretch between settlements. As he drew closer, the form took shape. A woman, crumpled on the ground, her chestnut hair tumbling loose from what had once been an elegant arrangement. "Whoa there, Scout," he murmured to his palomino, dismounting with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent most of his 30 years in the saddle. His spurs jangled as he approached the still figure. Xavier knelt beside her, noting her fine clothing despite its disheveled state. Her face was sunburnt and her lips cracked from dehydration, but he could tell she was young, perhaps in her mid-20s and not from these parts. Gently, he pressed his fingers to her neck, relieved to find a pulse, though faint. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice rough from days of little use. When she didn't respond, he reached for his canteen, carefully lifting her head to trickle a few drops of water between her parched lips. She coughed weakly, her eyelids fluttering but remaining closed. Xavier glanced around, assessing the situation. The nearest town was Silver Creek, a good 20 miles to the north, and his ranch lay 15 miles east. With the sun setting and the temperature dropping rapidly as it always did in the desert, he made his decision quickly. "Don't you worry, madam," he said, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." With gentle efficiency, he lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her and cradling her limp form against his chest. As Scout set off at a steady pace toward the Circle M ranch, Xavier couldn't help but wonder what circumstances had brought this woman to such a desperate state, alone in the wilderness. The moon had risen by the time Xavier guided his horse through the gate of his modest ranch. The main house stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, a sturdy 2-story structure built with his own hands over the past 5 years. A light burned in the window. Mrs. Abernathy, his housekeeper, was still awake. "Mrs. Abernathy," he called as he carefully dismounted, still holding Madeline. "Need some help here." The door swung open immediately, revealing a stout woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm as she took in the unconscious woman in Xavier's arms. "Good heavens, Mr. McKenzie, what's happened?" she exclaimed, stepping back to let him enter. "Found her collapsed out near Rattlesnake Ridge," he explained, carrying Madeline to the spare bedroom on the ground floor. "Looks like she's been without water for some time." Mrs. Abernathy moved with surprising speed for a woman her age, bustling ahead to turn down the bedcovers. "Poor thing. Put her here. I'll fetch water and some of my herbal remedies." Xavier laid Madeline gently on the bed. In the lamplight, he could better see her features: high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and long lashes that cast shadows on her flushed cheeks. Despite her disheveled state, there was a refined quality about her that spoke of Eastern upbringing. "She needs a doctor," he said, straightening. "Mrs. Abernathy returned with a basin of water and clean cloths. "Doc Wilson's gone to the Prescott settlement for the week. Won't be back till Monday at least." Xavier frowned. "Then we'll have to do what we can. I'll ride into town tomorrow for medicines if needed." The older woman nodded, already dampening a cloth to place on Madeline's forehead. "She's burning with fever. Help me get some water into her before you go tend to your horse." Together, they managed to rouse Madeline enough to swallow several sips of water. Her eyes opened briefly a startling shade of green, but there was no recognition in them, only confusion and pain before she slipped back into unconsciousness. "Go on now," Mrs. Abernathy said, shooing Xavier from the room. "I'll change her into something more comfortable and see to her properly." "A man has no business in a lady's sick room." Xavier nodded, though he found himself reluctant to leave. Something about the mysterious woman pulled at him, awakening protective instincts he hadn't realized he possessed. "Call if you need anything," he said, backing toward the door. "I've been nursing sick folks since before you were born, Mr. McKenzie," she replied with a hint of amusement. "Now go see to that horse of yours." As Xavier left to tend to Scout, his mind remained on the woman who had literally fallen into his care. Who was she? What had happened to leave her alone and dying in the desert? And why did he feel such an immediate connection to her? Questions without answers swirled in his mind as he completed his evening chores, glancing frequently at the house, where the light in the spare bedroom continued to burn long into the night. The next morning dawned cool and clear, with the promise of another scorching day ahead. Xavier had slept poorly, rising before first light to check on their guest. He found Mrs. Abernathy dozing in a chair beside the bed, and the woman herself looking slightly improved, though still feverish. "Any change?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle the housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy straightened, blinking away sleep. "She woke once in the night, took some broth. Fever's high, but not dangerously so. She's strong, this one." Xavier nodded, relief flooding through him. "I'll ride into town for medicines after breakfast. Did she say anything? Her name?" "Madeline, Mrs. Abernathy replied. "That's all I could make out before she drifted off again." "Madeline," Xavier repeated, testing the name. It suited her somehow elegant but with substance. After a quick breakfast, Xavier saddled Scout and made the hour-long ride to Silver Creek. The small but growing town served as the commercial hub for the surrounding ranches and mines. The general store, run by Hiram Powelson and his wife, carried basic medical supplies along with everything else a frontier community might need. The bell above the door jangled as Xavier entered, nodding to Hiram behind the counter. "Morning, Xavier," the storekeeper greeted him. "What brings you in so early? Thought you weren't due for supplies till next week." "Got an unexpected guest," Xavier explained, removing his hat. "A woman I found collapsed out near my south pasture, needs medicine for fever and exposure." Hiram's bushy eyebrows rose with interest. "A woman, you say? Alone? That's mighty strange." "Strange indeed," Xavier agreed, not wanting to invite too many questions. Silver Creek thrived on gossip, and he wanted to protect Madeline's privacy until he knew more about her situation. "Got any of that fever powder Dr. Wilson recommends?" As Hiram gathered the requested medicines, his wife emerged from the back room, immediately joining the conversation. "A woman out in that wasteland. Was she robbed, do you think? There's been talk of bandits working the stage routes again." Xavier frowned. He hadn't considered that possibility, though it would explain Madeline's circumstances. "Could be. She wasn't in any condition to explain when I found her." "Poor dear," Mrs. Powelson clucked sympathetically. "If you need any help nursing her, you send word. I'd be happy to come out." "Mrs. Abernathy's got things well in hand," Xavier assured her, paying for his purchases. "But thank you for the offer." As he turned to leave, Sheriff Thomas Blackwood entered the store, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of Xavier. "McKenzie, just the man I wanted to see," the lawman said, clapping Xavier on the shoulder. "Got some strays of yours down by Carpenter Creek, recognized your brand." Xavier groaned. He couldn't afford to lose any cattle. "Much obliged for letting me know. I'll send Miguel and the boys to round them up today." The sheriff nodded, then narrowed his eyes at the medical supplies Xavier was purchasing. "Someone taken ill at your place?" Before Xavier could answer, Hiram jumped in. "He found a woman half dead in the desert yesterday, taking care of her at his ranch." Sheriff Blackwood's expression grew serious. "That's so. Any idea who she might be?" "Name's Madeline. That's all I know," Xavier replied. "She was unconscious when I found her, barely spoke a word since." The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Stage from Tucson was robbed 3 days back, about 30 miles south of here. All passengers and driver killed, according to the one guard who survived, or so we thought. Guard said there was a female teacher headed for Tucson. Wonder if your guest might be her. Xavier felt a chill despite the growing heat of the day. All killed, you sure about that? That's what the guard reported. He was shot too, barely made it to the relay station. But if your lady survived somehow? The sheriff shrugged. Might be worth asking her when she's able. Those bandits are still out there, and any information could help us catch them. I'll let you know when she's well enough for questions, Xavier promised, his mind racing with this new information. If Madeline had survived such an attack, she'd been through even more than he'd imagined. The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual as Xavier pondered what he'd learned. If Madeline was indeed the teacher from the stage robbery, she might be in danger still. The bandits sometimes eliminated witnesses, and if they discovered one had escaped. He urged Scout to a faster pace, suddenly anxious to return to the ranch and ensure all was well. When Xavier arrived home, he found Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen, preparing a light broth for their patient. The savory aroma filled the house, reminding him he'd missed the midday meal. "How is she?" he asked, setting his packages on the table. "Awake and coherent, Mrs. Abernathy replied with evident satisfaction. "Fever's down a bit. She's asking questions, wants to know where she is and who rescued her." Xavier felt an unexpected surge of anticipation. "Did you tell her?" Said she was at the Circle M Ranch and that the owner had found her. "Thought you might want to introduce yourself properly." The older woman gave him a knowing look that made him uncomfortable. "I'll bring her the medicine," he offered, unwrapping the packet of fever powder, "and some water." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, turning back to her cooking. "The broth will be ready shortly. See if she feels up to eating a little." Xavier mixed the medicine with water, then knocked softly on the bedroom door. A faint "come in" reached his ears, a gentle voice with the unmistakable refinement of an Eastern accent. He entered to find Madeline propped up against the pillows, her chestnut hair neatly braided and draped over one shoulder. Someone, Mrs. Abernathy, presumably had dressed her in a clean nightgown. Though still pale, with dark circles under her eyes, she looked remarkably improved from the day before. Those green eyes widened slightly as they fixed on him, taking in his tall frame, the dusty trail clothes, the stubble on his jaw. Xavier suddenly wished he'd taken time to clean up before coming to see her. "You must be my rescuer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Xavier nodded, approaching the bed with the medicine. "Xavier McKenzie, madam, this is my ranch. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," she replied with a weak attempt at humor. "But alive, thanks to you. Mrs. Abernathy says you found me in the desert." "Yes, madam." "You were in pretty bad shape." He held out the glass. "This should help with the fever. Doctor's orders well, storekeeper's orders, as our doctor's away." She accepted the glass with a small smile that transformed her face, hinting at the beauty that would return with her health. "Please call me Madeline, Madeline Foster. I feel we're past formalities, considering you've already saved my life." "Madeline," he repeated, noticing how her name felt right on his lips. "And I'm Xavier." She drank the medicine without complaint, though he could tell by her expression that it tasted bitter. When she finished, she handed back the glass, her fingers brushing his momentarily. Even in her weakened state, that brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. "Thank you, Xavier," she said, her eyes holding his, "for everything. Mrs. Abernathy tells me I've been here nearly a day. I've imposed on your hospitality without even being conscious to appreciate it." "No imposition," he assured her, setting the glass aside. "Couldn't exactly leave you out there to die. Nevertheless, I'm grateful." She paused, a shadow crossing her features. I need to get word to Tucson somehow. They're expecting me to take up a teaching position, and after what happened." Xavier hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about what he'd learned in town. "Madeline, were you on the stage that was attacked 3 days ago?" Her face paled even further and her hands clutched at the blanket. "Yes, how did you know?" "Sheriff mentioned it in town today. Said there was a teacher headed for Tucson." He sat carefully on the edge of the chair beside the bed. He also said they thought everyone had died except one guard. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. "They shot everyone." The driver, the other passengers a young couple and an older gentleman. I only survived because I fell out when the stage tipped during the attack. I must have hit my head. When I came to, the bandits were gone and everyone was. She swallowed hard. I knew I couldn't stay there. I started walking, hoping to find help. The rest is just fragments until I woke up here. Xavier felt a surge of admiration for her courage and a corresponding anger at the men who had caused such suffering. "You're safe now," he assured her. "And as soon as you're well enough, we'll get word to Tucson about what happened." She nodded gratefully, then frowned. "But I've lost everything, my clothes, my teaching materials, the small amount of money I had. How will I, one worry at a time?" Xavier interrupted gently. "First, you need to rest and recover. We can sort out the rest later." A knock at the door announced Mrs. Abernathy with the broth. "Here we are," she said cheerfully, entering with a tray. "Time to build up your strength, Miss Foster." Xavier stood, feeling suddenly awkward. "I'll leave you to eat in peace, got ranch work waiting." Madeline's eyes met his again, something unspoken passing between them. "Will you come back later? I'd like to hear more about this place, about how you found me." "Of course," he promised, an inexplicable warmth spreading through his chest at her request. "This evening after chores." As he left the room, Xavier was struck by the realization that in just 24 hours, his orderly, solitary life had been completely disrupted, and somehow, he didn't mind at all. The days that followed fell into a pattern as Madeline gradually regained her strength. Xavier would check on her each morning before heading out to work the ranch, then return in the evening to sit with her, sharing stories of his day while she told him about her life in Boston and her journey west. He learned that she was 24 years old, the daughter of a professor who had died the previous year, leaving her with few options but to accept the teaching position in Tucson. Her mother had passed when she was a child, and she had no siblings or close relatives to rely upon. "Teaching was the only respectable profession open to me," she explained one evening, a week after her rescue. By now, she was able to sit in a chair by the window, dressed in one of Mrs. Abernathy's altered dresses, her color much improved. "And the salary offered in Tucson was double what I could earn in Boston." Xavier, seated across from her, nodded in understanding. "The territories are desperate for educated people, especially women willing to teach. Children out here don't get much schooling otherwise." "And now I've failed before I even began," she said with a sigh, gazing out at the purpling twilight. "The school term starts in 2 weeks, and here I am, without even a change of clothes to my name." "Sheriff Blackwood sent a telegram to Tucson, explaining what happened," Xavier reminded her. "They know you're alive and recovering." "Yes, but for how long will they hold the position? I have no way to get there in my current state, and no resources to start over once I arrive." Her hands twisted in her lap, betraying her anxiety. Xavier had been thinking about this problem for days. The logical solution, the one that had kept him awake more nights than he cared to admit, was sitting before him, but he hesitated to voice it, unsure how she would respond. "There might be a way," he said finally, choosing his words with care. "Silver Creek doesn't have a proper school yet, but there's talk of starting one. The town's growing, with more families arriving every month. The Women's Auxiliary has been raising funds, but they haven't found a teacher willing to come this far out." Madeline turned from the window to look at him, a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Are you suggesting?" "It would be temporary," he hastened to add. "Just until you're fully recovered and have saved enough to continue to Tucson, if that's still what you want. But it would give you time and a purpose." She considered this, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think they would accept me? After all, I was hired by Tucson." "I don't see why not. You're qualified, available, and already here. Seems providential, if you ask me." He leaned forward, warming to the idea. "I could take you into town tomorrow to meet with Mrs. Powelson. She heads the auxiliary. Let you two discuss possibilities." A smile slowly bloomed on Madeline's face, transforming it in a way that made Xavier's heart skip a beat. "I would like that very much." "Thank you, Xavier. You seem to have a habit of rescuing me." He returned her smile, ignoring the peculiar sensation in his chest. "Just being neighborly, madam." The following day dawned clear and promising as Xavier helped Madeline into his wagon for the trip to Silver Creek. Mrs. Abernathy had done her best with alterations, but the borrowed dress still hung awkwardly on Madeline's slender frame. "I'm sorry I don't have anything more suitable," she apologized, as Xavier offered his hand to assist her. "You look fine," he assured her, noticing how the blue calico brought out the green in her eyes despite the poor fit. "Besides, once Mrs. Powelson hears your story, she'll have half the women in town sewing for you within the hour." Madeline laughed, a sound that Xavier had come to treasure during their evening conversations. "I hope you're right. I feel like such a burden already." "Never that," he said firmly, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "Giddy up." The journey to town gave Xavier a chance to point out landmarks on his property, explaining the operation of the ranch and his plans for expansion. Madeline listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that revealed her quick mind. "How did you come to own such a place?" she asked as they crossed Carpenter Creek, the water running low in the late summer heat. "You mentioned you built the house yourself, but not how you acquired the land." Xavier was silent for a moment, considering how much to share. His past wasn't something he discussed often, but with Madeline, he found himself wanting to be open. "I was a cavalry scout during the war," he began, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Afterward, I drifted west, did some work for the Army mapping territories, then as a scout for wagon trains. Saved most of what I earned. 5 years ago, I won a poker game against a man who'd had too much to drink. He wagered the deed to a parcel of land he'd never even seen. Turned out to be 1,500 acres of decent grazing land with a good water source. Just like that." "You became a rancher through a card game." Madeline sounded both amused and impressed. Xavier chuckled. "Not exactly. The deed was legitimate, but the land was raw wilderness. Took 2 years of backbreaking work to build the house and outbuildings, fence the property, acquire stock. First winter, I lived in a tent while cutting timber for the house." "Alone?" she asked softly. "Mrs. Abernathy joined me in the second year. Her husband had been killed in a mining accident and she needed somewhere to go. We struck a deal. She keeps house. I provide room, board, and protection." He glanced at her. "Miguel, my foreman, came next with his family. Now I've got 6 ranch hands, all with small cabins on the property. We're like a little community." "It sounds wonderful," Madeline said with a wistfulness that caught his attention. "To build something from nothing, to create a home and purpose. I envy that. It's not too late for you to do the same," he pointed out. "Teaching in Silver Creek could be just the beginning." The hope that brightened her expression warmed him more than the Arizona sun beating down upon them. Silver Creek was bustling when they arrived, the main street lined with horses and wagons as ranchers and townspeople went about their Saturday business. Xavier helped Madeline down, conscious of the curious stares directed their way. News of the mysterious woman he'd rescued had clearly spread throughout the community. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin with quiet dignity despite her borrowed clothes and the lingering weakness from her ordeal. "Ready." They made their way to the general store, where Hiram greeted them with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Foster, good to see you up and about. The whole town's been talking about your miraculous survival." "Thank you, Mr. Powelson," Madeline replied with perfect composure. "I owe my life to Mr. Mackenzie's timely intervention." "Is your wife available?" Xavier asked, steering the conversation away from Madeline's ordeal. "We'd like to speak with her about a matter of some importance." "She's in the back room with the other ladies of the auxiliary," Hiram replied, his eyes moving speculatively between Xavier and Madeline. "Planning the harvest festival. Shall I fetch her?" "If you would," Xavier confirmed. While they waited, several customers entered the store, each finding transparent excuses to linger and stare at Madeline. She bore the scrutiny with grace, though Xavier could feel the tension in her arm where it rested on his. Mrs. Powelson emerged from the back room, followed by several other women, all clearly eager to meet the subject of so much recent gossip. "Miss Foster," Mrs. Powelson exclaimed, hurrying forward to take Madeline's hands in her own. "How wonderful to see you recovered. We've all been praying for your health." "You're very kind," Madeline replied with a warm smile. "Mr. Mackenzie has told me of your community's concern. I'm deeply touched. Come, you must meet everyone." the storekeeper's wife insisted, drawing Madeline toward the group of women. "Ladies, this is Miss Madeline Foster, the brave teacher who survived that dreadful attack." Xavier stepped back, allowing Madeline space to introduce herself properly. He watched with admiration as she charmed the women with her gracious manner and articulate speech, clearly every inch the educated lady despite her current circumstances. When the initial flurry of introductions subsided, he caught Madeline's eye and nodded encouragingly. She took a breath and addressed Mrs. Powelson directly. "Mr. McKenzie mentioned that Silver Creek has been considering establishing a school," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I understand my situation is unusual, but I would like to offer my services as a teacher, at least temporarily, while I recover from my ordeal and determine my next steps." The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. The women exchanged excited glances and Mrs. Powelson actually clapped her hands in delight. "A teacher. Here in Silver Creek. Why, it's an answer to our prayers." What followed was a whirlwind of discussion about available buildings, potential students' salary, and accommodations. Xavier contributed occasionally, but mostly he observed with satisfaction as Madeline handled herself with professional competence, clearly in her element when discussing educational matters. By the time they left the store 2 hours later, Madeline had been officially hired as Silver Creek's first schoolteacher, with classes to begin in 3 weeks' time. The town council would convert the unused back room of the church into a classroom, and she would board with the Powelsons until more permanent arrangements could be made. Additionally, the women had organized an immediate effort to provide Madeline with a proper wardrobe, each volunteering fabric, notions, or sewing skills to the cause. "That went even better than I expected," Xavier commented as he helped her back into the wagon. "Seems you've charmed the entire women's auxiliary in one afternoon." Madeline's face was flushed with excitement, her eyes bright with purpose for the first time since he'd found her. "It feels like a miracle, Xavier. Yesterday, I had nothing and nowhere to go. Today, I have a position, a purpose, and apparently a new wardrobe in the making. And 18 students already enrolled," he added with a grin. "Silver Creek's been waiting for someone like you, Madeline." As they drove back to the ranch, Madeline grew quieter, seemingly lost in thought. Finally, as they approached the turn to the Circle M, she spoke. "I'm not sure how to thank you, Xavier, for saving my life, for opening your home to me, and now for helping me secure a future here." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I've imposed on your hospitality for over a week. I should move to town as soon as possible." Xavier felt an unexpected pang at the thought of her leaving. "There's no rush," he said, perhaps too quickly. "Mrs. Powelson said they need time to prepare your room and you're still regaining your strength. Besides, Mrs. Abernathy would be heartbroken to lose your company so soon." "Mrs. Abernathy's company has been a blessing," Madeline agreed with a smile, "as has yours. Our evening conversations have been the highlight of my days." Xavier's heart quickened at her words, though he tried to maintain his usual composure. "Mine too," he admitted. "The ranch can be a lonely place despite the workers and Mrs. Abernathy. It's been nice having someone to talk with who sees the world differently." Their eyes met briefly before Xavier looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. In just over a week, this woman had somehow become important to him in ways he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. "At least stay until your new clothes are ready," he suggested, guiding the horses through the gate to the ranch. "And until you're fully recovered. Doc Wilson should be back tomorrow. I'd feel better if he gave you a clean bill of health before you move to town." Madeline seemed to consider this, then nodded. "That sounds sensible. Thank you, Xavier. I accept your continued hospitality with gratitude." As they approached the house, Xavier found himself relieved that she would remain at the Circle M a while longer, though he knew it was only postponing the inevitable. Madeline Foster had her own path to follow, and it would eventually lead away from his ranch, and quite possibly, from Silver Creek entirely once she had saved enough to continue to Tucson. The thought left him with an emptiness he hadn't expected, and he wondered when exactly this woman had come to matter so much. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Madeline prepared for her new role. True to Xavier's prediction, the women of Silver Creek rallied around her, providing not only clothes but also teaching materials, books, and everything else she might need to establish a proper school. Dr. Wilson pronounced her physically recovered, though he cautioned against overexertion. The nightmares that had plagued her since the attack gradually became less frequent, though Xavier still occasionally heard her cry out in the night and had to resist the urge to go to her, despite Mrs. Powelson's readiness to receive her as a boarder. Madeline remained at the Circle M, explaining that the quiet and fresh air were beneficial to her continued recovery. Xavier didn't question her decision, selfishly grateful for each additional day of her presence. Their evening conversations expanded to include readings from Xavier's small library, discussions of the books they had both enjoyed, and sometimes just comfortable silence as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. On the evening before Madeline was to begin teaching, they found themselves once again on the porch, the air cooling rapidly as darkness fell. Xavier had been teaching her to identify constellations, a skill he had learned during his scouting days. "There's Cassiopeia," he said, pointing to a distinctive W-shaped pattern of stars. "The queen who boasted of her beauty." "And was punished for her vanity," Madeline added, her shoulder brushing against his as she leaned to follow his pointing finger. "Chained to her throne in the heavens, forced to hang upside down for part of her journey across the sky." Xavier glanced at her, surprised. "You know the story," she smiled, her face silvered by moonlight. "My father was a professor of classics. Greek and Roman mythology were bedtime stories in our house. Your father sounds like an interesting man." "He was," she agreed, a touch of sadness in her voice. "Brilliant, kind, but impractical about money. When he died, there were more debts than assets, hence my journey west." Xavier was silent for a moment, contemplating the twist of fate that had brought her to his doorstep. "Do you ever regret it, coming west?" Madeline considered the question, her gaze returning to the stars. "Even after everything that's happened, no, I don't regret it. If I hadn't come, I wouldn't have met you or Mrs. Abernathy or the good people of Silver Creek." She paused. "I wouldn't have discovered my own strength." "You're the strongest woman I've ever met," Xavier said softly, meaning every word. "Most would have broken after what you endured." She turned to look at him, her expression serious in the dim light. "I had help. You found me when I thought all was lost. You've been my anchor, Xavier." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since the day he'd carried her unconscious form into his home. Xavier's hand moved of its own accord to cover hers where it rested on the porch railing. Madeline, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Both turned to see a rider approaching at speed, silhouetted against the night sky. Xavier straightened, instantly alert. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the edge of the porch as the rider drew closer. "Xavier," the voice belonged to Miguel, his foreman. "Sheriff's here with news, says it's urgent." Xavier frowned, glancing back at Madeline, who had risen to her feet, tension evident in her posture. "Tell him I'll be right there." As Miguel rode back toward the main gate, Xavier turned to Madeline. "I need to see what this is about. Wait inside, please." She nodded, though reluctance was clear in her expression. "Be careful." Xavier found Sheriff Blackwood dismounting near the barn, where lanterns cast pools of light in the gathering darkness. The lawman's expression was grim, his normally jovial manner absent. "Evening, Sheriff," Xavier greeted him. "What brings you out so late?" "News from Tucson," Blackwood replied without preamble. "The bandits who attacked the stage they've struck again killed 2 more people, but this time one of them was captured." Xavier felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. And he talked, named his partners. 4 men, led by someone called the Colonel, a former Confederate officer turned outlaw. "They're heading this way, McKenzie." "This way? Why would they?" Xavier stopped as understanding dawned. "They know someone survived the attack. They're coming for Madeline." Blackwood nodded grimly. "The prisoner said they'd learned a woman escaped, that she might have seen their faces. The Colonel doesn't leave witnesses." Xavier's mind raced. "How much time do we have?" "Hard to say." The prisoner claims they were 2 days behind him, which means they could reach Silver Creek by tomorrow night or the day after. The sheriff's hand rested on his gun. I've wired for help from the territorial marshal, but it'll take time for them to get here. Meanwhile, I'm deputizing men I trust. We'll set up watches at all the approaches to town. And Madeline, she's supposed to start teaching tomorrow. Not anymore, Blackwood said firmly. She needs to stay out of sight until we catch these men. Is she still here at your ranch? Yes, Xavier confirmed, making a swift decision. And she'll stay here. The Circle M is more defensible than the town, and I've got men who can help protect her. The sheriff considered this, then nodded. Might be for the best. Town would be the first place they'd look for her, but you'll need to be ready, McKenzie. These aren't ordinary bandits. The colonel was a cavalry officer. He knows tactics. So do I, Xavier reminded him grimly. I'll have the ranch prepared by morning. After discussing specific defensive measures, the sheriff mounted his horse to return to town. I'll send word when we have more information. Keep her safe, Xavier. With my life, Xavier promised, the words coming easily because they were true. As the sheriff rode away, Xavier turned toward the house, dreading the conversation ahead. Madeline had already endured so much. How could he tell her that the nightmare wasn't over, that the men who had murdered her fellow passengers were now hunting her specifically? He found her waiting in the parlor, her face pale with apprehension. What is it? She asked immediately. I can tell by your expression that something's wrong. Xavier took a deep breath, then sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in his. Briefly, he related what the sheriff had told him, watching as fear and then determination crossed her expressive features. So I've put you and everyone at the Circle M in danger, she said when he finished, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. No, he contradicted firmly. The men who attacked your stage are responsible for this situation, not you, and we're going to protect you, Madeline. I promise you that. She searched his face, seeming to draw strength from his conviction. What about the school? The children were expecting to start classes tomorrow. It will have to wait, he said gently. Your safety comes first, Mrs. Paulson can spread word that you've fallen ill and classes will be delayed. Madeline nodded, accepting the necessity, though he could see it pained her to disappoint the students. What do we do now? We prepare, Xavier said simply. The ranch is defensible and I have good men. By morning we'll be ready for visitors, welcome or otherwise. And if they come, Xavier's jaw tightened, then they'll learn that the Circle M protects its own. The look she gave him then, one of trust and something deeper that he dared not name, strengthened his resolve. Whatever came, he would keep her safe. The alternative was unthinkable. The next day was a flurry of preparations. Xavier gathered his ranch hands at dawn, explaining the situation and organizing them into watches. The bunkhouse was fortified, windows boarded, and strategic positions identified around the property. Rifles and ammunition were distributed, and escape routes planned in case they needed to evacuate quickly. Madeline insisted on helping, preparing food that could be eaten cold if necessary, and assisting Mrs. Abernathy in gathering medical supplies. Her calm efficiency impressed Xavier, who found himself watching her more often than he should have, distracted by her quiet courage in the face of renewed danger. By midday, the ranch was as secure as they could make it. Xavier had sent Miguel into town with a message for Sheriff Blackwood, requesting an update and offering the Circle M as a fallback position for the town's defenders if needed. As the afternoon waned, Xavier found Madeline in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with more force than was strictly necessary, her frustration evident in every movement. Keeping busy? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up, a strand of hair falling across her forehead. Trying to. It's better than sitting idle, imagining every possible terrible outcome. Xavier crossed to her, gently brushing the errant strand of hair back from her face. We're as ready as we can be. The sheriff has men watching all approaches to the area. If these bandits come anywhere near Silver Creek, we'll have warning. Madeline sighed, setting aside the dough and wiping her hands on her apron. I know, and I'm grateful for everything you and the others are doing. It's just... She trailed off, looking away. Just what? He prompted softly. I was starting to feel safe again, she admitted, her voice barely audible. To believe I might have found a place where I belong, and now you're afraid that's being taken away," he finished for her. "But it's not, Madeline. Whatever happens in the next few days, your place in Silver Creek is secure. The town needs you." She met his gaze, a question in her eyes. "And what about you, Xavier? Do you need me too?" The directness of her question caught him off guard, but he found he couldn't dissemble, not with her life potentially at stake, and certainly not when her green eyes were looking at him with such vulnerability and hope. "Yes," he said simply. "More than I expected to need anyone again." The admission hung between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Madeline's expression softened, a smile forming despite the tension of the day. "Good," she whispered, "because I need you too." Xavier stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than caution or propriety. His hand cupped her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. For a moment, the danger surrounding them receded, and there was only the warmth of her skin against his palm, the rapid beat of his heart, the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. "Xavier," she murmured, her voice carrying a wealth of emotion. The sound of a distant gunshot shattered the moment. Xavier tensed, immediately alert. "Stay here," he ordered, moving swiftly toward the door. "But please, Madeline, stay with Mrs. Abernathy in the root cellar if you hear more shots." He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. "I'll come for you when it's safe, I promise." Outside, Xavier found his men already responding, taking up defensive positions as Miguel rode hard toward the house from the north pasture. "Riders." The foreman called as he approached. Coming from the east, 5 of them moving fast, Xavier's mind calculated quickly. 5 riders, one more than the sheriff had mentioned. Had they recruited another, or was it someone else entirely? "Get everyone in position," he instructed Miguel. "But hold fire until we're sure who they are." As Miguel hurried to relay the orders, Xavier took his rifle from where it leaned against the porch and moved to the corner of the house, which offered a clear view of the eastern approach. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land and making it difficult to distinguish details at a distance. Minutes ticked by, tension mounting with each passing moment. Then, on the horizon, Xavier spotted them 5 riders approaching at a gallop, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He raised his spyglass, trying to make out their features. As they drew closer, he could see that 4 were rough-looking men, trail-worn and armed. The 5th, riding slightly ahead, was more distinctively dressed in what appeared to be a modified cavalry uniform, with a trimmed beard and an air of authority even at a distance. "The colonel," Xavier muttered to himself, lowering the glass. He was about to signal his men to prepare for confrontation when something unexpected happened. From the south, another group of riders appeared, Sheriff Blackwood and at least 10 deputies, moving to intercept the approaching bandits. The outlaws spotted the lawmen and veered sharply, heading directly toward the ranch buildings, apparently seeking cover for a fight. Xavier realized with alarm that they would reach the house before the sheriff could cut them off. "Positions," he shouted to his men. "They're coming in." The ranch hands scrambled to their assigned places as Xavier moved back toward the house, determined to ensure Madeline's safety before joining the defense. He found her in the hallway, rifle in hand, clearly having ignored his instructions to take shelter. "Madeline, what are you? I'm not hiding in a cellar while men fight for my life," she said firmly, her grip on the weapon steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "I know how to shoot. My father taught me." Xavier wanted to argue, to insist she take cover, but there was no time. The sound of hoofbeats was growing louder, and he could hear shouts as the sheriff's posse closed in. "Stay behind me," he compromised, moving to the front window to assess the situation. The bandits had reached the ranch yard, dismounting quickly and taking cover behind the water trough and nearby wagon. The colonel for it could be no one else was issuing orders, directing his men with military precision. The sheriff's posse was approaching rapidly from the south, spreading out to surround the outlaws. "They're trapped between us and the sheriff," Xavier observed, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "If they're smart, they'll surrender." "Are they smart?" Madeline asked, moving to peer cautiously around him. Before he could answer, a voice called out from the yard. In the house. We know you're harboring a witness to our business down Tucson Way. The voice was cultured, with a southern drawl the Colonel, Xavier assumed. Send her out and the rest of you can live. Xavier exchanged a glance with Madeline, whose face had gone pale but determined. Not a chance, he muttered, then raised his voice to reply. This is private property. You're surrounded by armed men. Throw down your weapons and surrender to the sheriff. A harsh laugh was the only response, followed by a sudden barrage of gunfire directed at the house. Xavier pulled Madeline down below the windowsill as bullets splintered the frame above them. They're desperate, he said, checking his rifle. The sheriff has them outnumbered and outflanked. They're making a last stand. The gunfire intensified as the sheriff's men joined the fray, exchanging shots with the bandits from their positions around the ranch yard. Xavier knew his men would be firing too, from the barn and outbuildings, creating a crossfire that would be difficult for the outlaws to withstand. Stay here, he told Madeline, moving toward the door. I need to coordinate with the sheriff. Xavier, no. She caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. It's too dangerous, he paused, looking down at her, struck by the fierce protectiveness in her expression. I'll be careful, he promised. But I need to end this, Madeline, for you, for us. Something in his words seemed to reach her. She released his arm, nodding once though fear still shadowed her eyes. For us, she repeated softly. Xavier moved swiftly to the side door where he would be less exposed. Outside, the gunfight had settled into a pattern, with the bandits pinned down but still dangerous, returning fire whenever one of the sheriff's men showed themselves. Making his way from cover to cover, Xavier reached the sheriff's position behind a sturdy oak at the edge of the yard. "McKenzie," Blackwood acknowledged grimly. "Your men in position, all around," Xavier confirmed. "How do you want to play this?" The sheriff gestured to the surrounded outlaws. "They're not going anywhere. I've sent for more men from town. Once they arrive, we'll close the circle and demand surrender. And if they don't surrender," Blackwood's expression hardened, "then we do what's necessary. These men have killed innocent people. They came here intending to kill Miss Foster. I won't risk any more lives trying to take them alive if they insist on fighting." Xavier nodded his agreement, then tensed as he noticed movement from the outlaw's position. The colonel had stood up, seemingly unconcerned about the guns trained on him from all sides. "Sheriff." The man called, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I believe we find ourselves at an impasse." "No impasse, Colonel," Blackwood replied. "You're surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender now," the colonel laughed, the sound chilling in its confidence. "I think not. You see, while you've been focusing on us, one of my men has made his way to your precious witness." Xavier's blood ran cold. He scanned the positions of the bandits, counting quickly. 4 men, including the colonel, not 5. The 5th had disappeared during the confusion of the initial exchange. "Madeline," he breathed, already turning back toward the house. "Go," the sheriff urged. "We'll keep these 4 busy." Xavier ran, abandoning caution in his desperate need to reach Madeline before the missing outlaw. The house seemed impossibly far away, though in reality it was only 100 yards from the sheriff's position. Gunfire continued to echo across the ranch yard, but Xavier barely registered it, his entire being focused on reaching the woman who had come to mean everything to him. He burst through the side door, calling her name, but received no answer. The main floor was empty, showing signs of hasty movement: an overturned chair, a dropped rifle that he recognized as the one Madeline had been holding. Coldly controlled panic propelled him through the house, checking each room with swift efficiency. When he found nothing, he moved upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. The second floor was similarly deserted, no sign of Madeline or the intruder. Where would the outlaw take her? Xavier's mind raced through possibilities. The root cellar, the barn. Or would he try to use her as a hostage to secure escape for his companions? A noise from outside caught his attention, the sound of a horse being urged to speed. Xavier rushed to the window in time to see a rider galloping away from the back of the house, a struggling figure held before him on the saddle. Even at a distance, he recognized Madeline's chestnut hair, coming loose from its pins as she fought against her captor. Without hesitation, Xavier raced back downstairs and out the rear door. His horse, Scout, was tethered at the kitchen entrance, ready as always. In seconds, he was in the saddle, urging the Palomino to pursuit. "Come on, boy," he urged, leaning low over Scout's neck. "We need to catch them." The western sky blazed crimson as Xavier rode, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of fire and blood. Ahead, the outlaw and his captive were making for the foothills, likely hoping to lose any pursuit in the rugged terrain as darkness fell. Xavier knew these lands intimately, every trail and shortcut, every hidden approach. He guided Scout along a parallel route, one that would intersect with the outlaw's path before he reached the hills. The Palomino responded magnificently, stretching into a full gallop that ate up the distance between them and their quarry. As they neared the point where the paths would meet, Xavier drew his rifle from its saddle holster, preparing for what must come next. He would have only one chance to stop the outlaw without endangering Madeline. The moment arrived as Scout crested a small rise. Below, the outlaw was just approaching, unaware of Xavier's presence above him. Madeline, however, saw him immediately, her eyes widening in recognition and hope. In that instant, she acted with remarkable presence of mind, suddenly going limp in her captor's grasp. The unexpected deadweight threw the outlaw off balance, forcing him to slow his horse and adjust his grip. It was all the opportunity Xavier needed. He took careful aim and fired, the shot striking the outlaw's shoulder. The man cried out, his grip on Madeline failing as he fought to control his startled horse. Xavier urged Scout down the slope, closing the distance rapidly. Madeline, seizing her moment, pushed away from the wounded outlaw and tumbled from the horse, hitting the ground hard but immediately rolling clear of the animal's hooves. The outlaw, recovering quickly despite his wound, drew his pistol and fired wildly at Xavier, the shots going wide as his injured arm threw off his aim. Xavier returned fire, his second shot finding its mark. The bandit toppled from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. Xavier was off Scout in an instant, rushing to where Madeline lay motionless on the ground. Fear clutched at his heart as he knelt beside her, gently turning her over. "Madeline, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but aware. "Xavier," she whispered, her voice rough, "you came for me." Relief washed through him so powerfully that he trembled with it. "I promised I would," he reminded her, helping her to sit up. "Are you hurt?" She winced, raising a hand to her head where a bruise was forming. "He struck me when I wouldn't stop fighting, and the fall was unpleasant. But I don't think anything's broken." Xavier's jaw tightened at the thought of someone hurting her, but he pushed the anger aside, focusing on what mattered. She was alive and now safe. "Can you stand? We need to get back to the ranch." With his support, Madeline rose unsteadily to her feet. Xavier kept an arm around her waist, unwilling to let go now that he had found her. "The others, the colonel and his men, what happened? The sheriff had them surrounded," Xavier explained, leading her towards Scout, who waited patiently nearby. "By now, they've either surrendered or—" He didn't finish the thought, but Madeline nodded in understanding. "It's over then?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Xavier looked down at her, at the courage in her eyes despite all she had endured, and felt something settle within him, a certainty about what truly mattered, about what he wanted for his future. "Yes," he said softly, "it's over, and something new is beginning." Her eyes searched his, finding whatever confirmation she needed. A smile bloomed on her face, transforming it despite the dirt and bruises. "Something new," she agreed, "something wonderful." Xavier helped her onto Scout, then mounted behind her, cradling her securely against his chest for the ride back to the ranch. As they rode, the last light of day faded from the sky, and the first stars appeared in the gathering darkness, bright points of hope in the vast western night. By the time they reached the Circle M, the confrontation was indeed over. Two of the bandits lay dead in the ranch yard, while the colonel and the fourth man had surrendered when their position became untenable. Sheriff Blackwood had them securely bound, ready for transport to the territorial prison where they would await trial for multiple murders. "Miss Foster," the sheriff exclaimed when he saw Madeline, "thank God you're safe," when we realized one of them had slipped away. "Mr. McKenzie found me in time," she said simply, her hand finding Xavier's as they stood together before the lawman. As he always seems to do. The events of that day marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another for the residents of Silver Creek and the Circle M Ranch. The territorial marshal arrived the following morning with additional men, taking custody of the colonel and his surviving accomplice for transport to Tucson, where justice awaited them. Madeline's school opened a week later than planned, but the delay only seemed to increase the community's enthusiasm for education. Children and parents alike flocked to the converted church room, eager to meet the brave teacher whose story had already become local legend. Xavier found himself spending more time in town than ever before, finding excuses to visit the schoolhouse, to walk Madeline home to her new boarding room at the Powelsons, to invite her for Sunday drives along the creek. Their courtship progressed with the quiet certainty of something meant to be, witnessed with approving smiles by the townspeople who had come to regard them both with affection and respect. On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 3 months after Xavier had found Madeline collapsed under the western sky, they sat together on the porch of the Circle M, watching the sunset paint the heavens in glorious color. Madeline now spent every weekend at the ranch, propriety satisfied by Mrs. Abernathy's constant presence as chaperone. "I received a letter from the school board in Tucson today," Madeline said, breaking a comfortable silence between them. "They've filled the teaching position permanently, but expressed appreciation for my note explaining my circumstances." Xavier tensed slightly beside her. "And how do you feel about that?" She turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "Relieved," she admitted. "I've found my place, Xavier, here in Silver Creek with my students, with you." The last words were spoken softly, almost shyly, though by now there could be no doubt of their feelings for one another. Still, they had never directly spoken of a future together, both content to let their relationship develop naturally after the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. Xavier took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her softer skin. "I've been thinking about that," he said, his voice deeper than usual with emotion. "About your place, about our future." Madeline's breath caught, her eyes never leaving his face. "Have you?" "The Circle M is growing," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "The new grazing land I purchased last month means we'll be expanding the herd come spring. The house, it's a good house, solid, but it feels empty when you're not in it." "Xavier," she whispered, hope and joy beginning to illuminate her features. He shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I never expected to find someone like you, Madeline. Never thought I'd want to share my life, my home, my dreams with anyone. But now I can't imagine a future without you in it." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was radiant as the setting sun. "Nor can I imagine one without you." "Then marry me," Xavier said simply, his heart in his voice. "Be my wife, my partner in everything. Help me make the Circle M not just a ranch, but a true home." Madeline's answer was in her eyes before she spoke, in the love that shone there as clearly as the first stars appearing in the evening sky. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, Xavier McKenzie, I will marry you." He drew her into his arms then, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of devotion, of passion, of a future bright with possibility. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing with joy, the western sky had deepened to indigo, scattered with stars that seemed to bless their union with ancient light. "When?" Xavier asked, reluctant to release her even as propriety demanded they maintain some distance while on the porch. "Christmas," she suggested, her eyes alight with plans. "A Christmas wedding here at the ranch, small, intimate, just our friends from town and your ranch hands." "Perfect," he agreed, kissing her again briefly. "Mrs. Abernathy will be overjoyed. She's been hinting about wedding bells since your second week here." Madeline laughed, the sound more precious to Xavier than any music. "She's not the only one. Mrs. Powelson has been showing me fabric samples for a wedding dress since our 3rd Sunday walk." "Seems everyone knew where we were headed before we did," Xavier observed wryly. "Not everyone," Madeline corrected, her expression softening. "I knew from that first night when I woke to find you watching over me. I knew I'd found not just a rescuer, but a home." Xavier's heart swelled with emotion too profound for words. Instead, he drew her close again, holding her as the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged in their full glory above the Circle M Ranch, their home, their future, their place in the vast tapestry of the western frontier. The Christmas wedding at the Circle M was everything Madeline had dreamed it would be. Snow had fallen the night before, unusual for the Arizona territory, but welcomed as a sign of blessing for the new couple. The ranch house was transformed with pine boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles, creating an atmosphere of warmth and celebration despite the winter chill. Madeline wore a gown of ivory silk, a gift from the women of Silver Creek who had pooled their resources to order the fabric from San Francisco. Mrs. Powelson and the other ladies had worked for weeks to create a dress worthy of the occasion, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, and tiny seed pearls adorning the bodice. Xavier, standing before the fireplace in the parlor where they would exchange their vows, caught his breath when he first saw her. He was resplendent himself in a new black suit, his usually untamed hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved for the occasion. "You're beautiful," he whispered as she joined him before the minister, a traveling preacher who had arrived just in time for the ceremony. "So are you," she replied with a smile that outshone the Christmas candles surrounding them. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promising love, fidelity, and partnership through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering of friends erupted in cheers and applause, none louder than Mrs. Abernathy, who dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, even as she beamed with satisfaction. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music provided by Miguel on his guitar and several other ranch hands who proved surprisingly talented musicians. Xavier and Madeline danced their first dance as husband and wife to a traditional Mexican waltz, moving together as if they had been partners for years rather than months. "Happy, Mrs. McKenzie," Xavier murmured as they swayed together, oblivious to the admiring glances of their guests. "Completely," Madeline assured him, her arms around his neck, her eyes reflecting the joy in his own. "And you, Mr. McKenzie, more than I ever thought possible," he admitted, drawing her closer. "This is just the beginning, Madeline, the beginning of everything." As the new year dawned, bringing with it promise and possibility, Xavier and Madeline settled into life as husband and wife at the Circle M. The school in Silver Creek continued to flourish under her guidance, growing to require a second teacher by spring as more families moved to the area, drawn by the reputation of both the school and the community. Xavier expanded the ranch operations, adding new grazing land and increasing the herd as planned. With Madeline's encouragement, he also established a small library in one room of their home, gradually acquiring books not just for themselves, but for any neighbor who wished to borrow them. Their home became a gathering place for the community, hosting everything from reading circles to barn dances, fulfilling Madeline's vision of making the Circle M not just a successful ranch, but the heart of a thriving community. In the summer of 1877, exactly 1 year after Xavier had found Madeline collapsed under the western sky, they welcomed their first child, a daughter with her mother's green eyes and her father's determined spirit. They named her Hope, a testament to what they had found in each other and what they wished for her future. As Xavier stood beside Madeline's bed, holding their newborn daughter and gazing down at his wife with love that grew deeper with each passing day, he marveled at how completely his life had changed in a single year. "What are you thinking?" Madeline asked softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm thinking about destiny," he replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "About how sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we're meant to be." She smiled, understanding immediately as she always did. Like a Boston schoolteacher collapsing in the Arizona desert, only to be found by a rancher with room in his heart and home for both of us. "Exactly like that," Xavier agreed, leaning down to kiss her tenderly. "The day I found you was the day my life truly began, Madeline." "And mine," she whispered against his lips. "Whatever happens, whatever the future holds, I'll always be grateful for that moment when I opened my eyes and saw you there, silhouetted against the western sky. Outside their window, that same sky stretched endless and blew over the Circle M ranch, promising infinite possibilities for the family who had found each other against all odds in the wild and beautiful Arizona territory. Their story, begun in desperation and danger, continued in love and hope, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the unexpected blessings that can arise from life's darkest moments. Xavier and Madeline McKenzie's legacy would grow and flourish in the years to come, as would their family. 2 years after Hope's birth, they welcomed twin boys Michael and James, who would eventually take over the ranch operations, expanding it into one of the most successful in the territory. Hope would follow in her mother's footsteps, becoming a teacher and eventually founding Silver Creek's first proper academy, which would educate generations of children from the surrounding communities. But through all the changes and growth, the heart of their story remained the same: a story of rescue and redemption, of love found in the most unexpected circumstances, of a family born from a moment of crisis transformed into a lifetime of joy. And on summer evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Xavier and Madeline could still be found sitting together on the porch of the Circle M, watching the sunset paint the western sky in the same glorious colors that had witnessed the beginning of their extraordinary journey together.